At 6:47 a.m. on March 14, 2024, Daniel Cooper was sitting on the front steps of his farmhouse outside Carterville, Illinois, holding the same two pages he'd been holding for weeks. Foreclosure notice. The paper had gone soft at the folds because he kept opening it, closing it, opening it again. Like repetition could turn the words into something else. 17 days. That was the number that kept landing in his chest when he tried to breathe normally. 17 days until March 31st, when the bank would take the 240 acres he'd worked since he was old enough to reach the pedals, the barn he'd repaired with his own hands, the house where his wife Martha still kept the kitchen light on when she left before dawn for her diner shift. Daniel was 63, and he'd spent his whole life doing the same thing his father did: wake up, work, fix what breaks, keep going. He'd always believed you could outwork bad luck. Then the last few years came like a slow leak you couldn't find. Grain prices that never seemed to make sense. Equipment repairs that hit at the worst time. A dry stretch that shaved the yield down. Medical bills that didn't care what month it was. And then that last loan. The one he took because he promised Martha he would not be the reason they lost everything, became the exact reason they were losing everything. His coffee sat beside him in a chipped mug, cold and bitter, and he didn't bother reheating it. He wasn't hungry either. Hunger was for people with plans. He read the number again, even though he had it memorized. $237,000. That was what Thomas Werner at the bank said it would take to stop the foreclosure. $237,000 might as well have been $200 million. Daniel looked out across the yard and the lane and the fields beyond, and he did what he'd been doing every morning. He tried to picture how it would look with someone else's name on it. He couldn't. He kept seeing his father's hands on the steering wheel of the old tractor, kept hearing his own voice as a kid promising he'd never let the land go. A truck passed on the county road, then another. Normal sounds, normal day. And then, at 6:55, he heard something that didn't fit. Not one engine, not a pickup, not the grain truck. A deeper rumble, layered, like multiple diesels turning into the drive at once. Daniel sat up straighter. His knees ached when he moved, but he didn't notice. The sound came closer, steady, heavy, and it didn't slow down the way a single vehicle would. He stood and stepped off the porch, squinting down the gravel lane. The first semi appeared at the bend, then a second behind it, then a third. And then Daniel's brain did that thing where it tries to file something under impossible, so it can move on. He didn't move on. The lane filled with trucks, flatbeds, one after another, long enough that the line ran out of sight and continued on the county road. Daniel walked a few steps forward without meaning to. Every flatbed carried a brand new John Deere tractor, the green and yellow still bright like it hadn't met real dirt yet. Some were wrapped in protective covering. Some had straps pulled so tight they looked pinned to the world. The first truck rolled toward his barn and stopped. Daniel stood near the edge of the yard, trying to find a reason this was happening that didn't involve him losing his mind. A man climbed down from the cab. 40s, maybe, clipboard, Heartland Transport Company jacket. The man looked at the house, then at Daniel, like he'd been trained to match faces to paperwork. "Mr. Daniel Cooper," he called. Daniel's throat tightened. He managed a nod because words wouldn't come out clean. The man took a few steps closer, professional but not cold. "Morning, sir. I've got a delivery for you." Daniel stared at the tractor behind him, then at the next truck creeping forward, then back at the driver. There's been a mistake," Daniel said. He hated how small his voice sounded. "I didn't order anything." The driver glanced at his clipboard. "No mistake on our end. Delivery is to Daniel Cooper. This address. 100 units. Daniel blinked. 100 what? The driver didn't flinch. 100 John Deere 6155 are tractors. Daniel let out a sound that was almost a laugh, but it died before it became anything. "You're saying 100 tractors are for me?" The driver nodded like he'd said 100 boxes. "Paid in full." Daniel's hands started to shake. He looked down at them like they belonged to somebody else. "Paid by who?" Daniel asked. "Because I didn't pay. I can't." He stopped because the rest of the sentence was humiliating, even to a stranger. The driver shifted his weight. "Sir, I don't get the purchase details. I get the route, the inventory, the signatures." Daniel tried again, slower, like the speed of his words might slow the world. "How much are we talking about?" The driver's eyes flicked briefly to the tractors, then back. "I'd be guessing, but 100 new 6,155ers? You're north of 12 million. Daniel felt dizzy. $12 million in tractors sitting on his gravel lane, while he had a foreclosure notice in his hand. It was so absurd his mind tried to reject it again. "This is a scam," Daniel said, and he heard the desperation in it. "This has to be. Nobody does that." The driver didn't get defensive. He lowered his voice a fraction. "Mr. Cooper, I've been hauling equipment for 23 years. I've seen some weird stuff. I've never seen this. But our dispatch confirmed payment. Verified. Cleared. We're here to deliver, not collect." Daniel looked down the line of trucks. 99 more. He imagined the county sheriff showing up. He imagined the bank showing up. He imagined the IRS showing up. He imagined Martha coming home and seeing this and thinking he'd lost his mind or done something illegal. Daniel swallowed. "I can't even. Where would I put 100 tractors?" The driver waited, patient in a way that made Daniel feel worse, like the man could see exactly how close Daniel was to breaking. "We do need to unload," the driver said. "We're blocking the road. Folks are gonna start calling," as if on cue. A car slowed on the county road and a face turned toward Daniel's lane. Then the car rolled forward again, slower than normal. Daniel looked at his barn. Modest, old equipment. Nothing that belonged in the same world as this delivery. He looked toward his south field. 40 acres that he'd left open because he hadn't had the money to plant it properly this year. The thought hit him hard. It had been empty because he was losing the farm anyway. "South field," Daniel said. "Line them up in the south field." The driver nodded, spoke into his radio, and the chain of movement began. Trucks reversed in careful angles. Ramps lowered. Tractors rolled down like they were being introduced to land they'd never touched. Drivers in work boots and gloves moved with practiced speed. Nobody celebrated. Nobody smiled. That made it feel more real, and it made Daniel feel more afraid. He walked back to the porch and sat down because his legs wouldn't hold him steady anymore. He still had the foreclosure notice in his hand. Now it looked like a joke. That's what scared him the most. He didn't trust joy. He didn't trust sudden miracles. He trusted hard work and bad news. He watched tractor after tractor take its place in the field, straight rows like a new kind of crop. At 7:20, his neighbor Harold Mitchell's pickup came up the road and slowed to almost nothing. Harold didn't even bother turning down his radio the way he usually did. He rolled past the start of Daniel's lane, then backed up like he wasn't sure what he'd seen. He parked crooked near the drive and got out without closing the door right away. He stood there, jaw loose, staring down the line of semis. Harold was a man who didn't waste words. When he finally walked up, he still didn't know what to say, so he said the only honest thing. "Daniel, what in God's name is this?" Daniel didn't try to pretend he had it under control. "I don't know," he said. Harold stared at him as if Daniel had just spoken a foreign language. "What do you mean you don't know?" Daniel lifted the foreclosure notice and then lowered it again, realizing it didn't belong in this moment. "They showed up. They said it's for me. They said it's paid." Harold looked past Daniel to the field where tractors were stacking up like somebody's insane. "Mistake. Paid by who?" Daniel shook his head. "No name." Harold let out a breath that sounded like anger, but it wasn't aimed at Daniel. It was aimed at the universe. That's millions." Daniel's voice came out flat. 12. Harold sat down on the porch step beside him without being asked. To old farmers watching something that did not happen to people like them. For a minute, neither one spoke. The trucks kept coming. The drivers kept unloading. The sound of diesel, hydraulics, steel ramps, tires hitting dirt. At 8:05, Daniel's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He didn't answer. At 8:17, it buzzed again. Unknown number again. He still didn't answer. He wasn't ready for anyone else's voice. He could barely handle his own thoughts. At 9:30 a.m., the last truck unloaded. The field held 100 tractors in clean rows. and Daniel felt like if he blinked too long they'd disappear, and he'd be back where he started. The lead driver came back with paperwork. "We need your signature confirming receipt," he said. Daniel took the pen. His hand shook so much he had to anchor his wrist against his knee. He wrote Daniel Cooper slowly, like signing his name might admit guilt. The driver gathered the papers and then paused. "There's one more thing," he said, and he reached into his clipboard. He pulled out a sealed manila envelope. Daniel's name was written on the front in handwriting Daniel didn't recognize. The driver held it out like it was heavy. Instructions said to give this to you personally. Daniel took it and felt a strange, stupid fear that the envelope would explain everything in a way that made it all worse. Harold leaned slightly, trying not to look like he was reading over Daniel's shoulder. Daniel didn't open it yet. He stared at it, then looked out at the tractors, then looked at the foreclosure notice still sitting on the porch beside his mug of cold coffee. "You okay, sir?" the driver asked, and his voice wasn't just polite now. It had something like concern in it. Daniel swallowed. "I don't know," he said again, because it was still the only true sentence he had. The driver nodded like he accepted that and stepped away. The crews packed up. Engines started. One by one, the semis pulled out, the gravel crunching under weight that was suddenly leaving. And Daniel was left with silence and a field full of brand new machines. That did not belong to his life. Harold stood up slowly. "Martha's gonna think you robbed a bank," he said, trying to make it lighter, failing. Daniel managed a weak sound in response. "I should call her," Daniel said, but he didn't move. Harold looked at the envelope. "Open it," he said. Daniel's fingers worked at the seal. It tore with a soft sound that felt too loud. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. Daniel unfolded it and read the first line, and his vision blurred before he understood why. "Daniel," it said, "you saved my life 42 years ago when I had nothing. You gave me a job, a place to sleep, and a chance when everyone else turned me away. You told me kindness matters more than money. You were right. These tractors are paid for. They're yours. No strings, no payback required. You don't remember me, but I never forgot you. Thank you for teaching me what it means to be a good man." Daniel read it again, slower, hoping a name would appear if he stared hard enough. There was no signature, no hint, just that last sentence sitting there like a hand on his shoulder and a weight on his chest. At the same time, Harold leaned in just enough to catch the gist, then he straightened, his face changing in a way Daniel rarely saw on him. 42 years, Harold said quietly. Daniel nodded, but he couldn't speak. He held the letter in both hands like it might float away, and the only thought he could form, over and over, was the same one. Who did I help that I forgot? And who loved me enough to remember me anyway? Daniel didn't wake up the next morning, because he never really slept. He just lay there listening for a sound that would prove the whole thing had been a dream, like engines pulling back onto the county road or a knock at the door from someone official, with a clipboard saying, "Sir, we need to correct an error." Nothing happened. The tractors stayed in the south field. The silence stayed in the house. He made coffee and forgot to drink it. He picked up the foreclosure notice, then put it down, then picked it up again, like he needed to remind himself what was still true. At 9:40 he walked out to the edge of the field and stopped short of the first row, because he didn't know what you were supposed to do with a gift that big. He wasn't touching them for the same reason he hadn't told anybody yet. Touching them felt like admitting they belonged to him, and he wasn't ready to believe anything that kind. At 10:15 Martha's car came up the drive faster than normal and braked hard enough. That gravel snapped under the tires. She didn't honk. She didn't call out. She just got out and stood there staring at the rows of green and yellow as if staring long enough would make the world explain itself. Daniel stayed on the porch because he could already see what was about to happen in her face. The way her eyes went from the field to him and back. The way her mouth tightened like she was holding in words she didn't want to say. "Daniel," she said, and it wasn't a greeting, it was a warning. He didn't try to soften it. He held out the letter, the one without a name, and she took it like her hands might break if she grabbed too hard. She read it once, then again, slower, her lips moving without sound. When she reached the line, about 42 years, She looked up sharply as if she'd misread the number. 42, she said. Daniel nodded. They said I wouldn't remember, he said. Martha's eyes filled and then cleared in the same second, like she refused to let emotion take over until facts were dealt with. Okay, she said, and he knew that tone. It was the same tone she used when the roof leaked or the car died on the side of the road. Okay means we're not panicking, she added, mostly to herself. She sat on the porch step beside him and read the letter a third time. No strings, she whispered. They actually wrote no strings. Daniel stared out at the field. Words are cheap, he said. Martha looked at him. That's you talking, she said. That's not the truth. The truth is you're scared. Daniel didn't deny it. I'm scared because I don't know what this touches, he said. Bank, taxes, people. I'm scared because I don't want it taken away and I don't want it to hurt us. Martha nodded, absorbing it like she always did, taking it in before responding. Then we do the one thing we can do, she said. We get ahead of the bank. Daniel checked the clock. 11:12. He'd been delaying that call because it felt like stepping into a room where you knew you'd be judged. He dialed Thomas Werner anyway. Werner answered with the same smooth, controlled voice he'd used during every conversation about the foreclosure, a voice trained to sound sympathetic while staying unmoved. Mr. Cooper, Werner said. Daniel didn't waste time. I need to stop the foreclosure, he said. Werner paused. Mr. Cooper, the foreclosure date is set for March 31st, he said. As I've explained, I'm paying it, Daniel cut in. Silence on the line. Then Werner's tone shifted from sympathetic to procedural. Your total debt, including fees and interest, is $237,000, he said. Do you have access to those funds? Daniel looked at Martha, then out at the field again. I will, he said. Werner didn't accept that. We will need proof of funds before we can halt proceedings, he replied. Daniel's jaw tightened. Come out here, he said. Today, Werner hesitated. Mr. Cooper, just come, Daniel said. 2 o'clock. Bring whatever paperwork you want. You need to see something with your own eyes. Werner's silence stretched long enough that Daniel could imagine him frowning at his desk, weighing whether this was another desperate promise. What am I coming to see? Werner asked. Daniel forced the words out like he was daring the universe to slap him for saying them. 100 brand new John Deere 6155R tractors, he said. Delivered yesterday. Paid in full. Sitting in my south field. Werner's response was careful, almost suspicious. I'm sorry, he said. Did you say 100? I did, Daniel answered. Werner cleared his throat. I will be there at 2, he said, and the line clicked dead. After the call, Daniel felt a brief wave of something like relief. But it didn't last. Relief required certainty, and he still didn't have it. Harold Mitchell pulled in around noon, slower this time, as if he expected the tractors to move on their own. He got out, looked from the field to Daniel to Martha, and didn't bother asking what happened because the question had become pointless. People in town are talking, Harold said. Martha's eyes narrowed. Let them, she said. Harold nodded, then looked at Daniel. Be careful, he said quietly. This kind of thing brings out the wrong kind of attention. Daniel knew. He'd lived long enough to know that a miracle didn't only bring gratitude. It also brought envy, suspicion, and people who thought they deserved a piece. At 2:03 a black BMW rolled up the drive. Werner stepped out wearing a coat to clean for gravel and fields, holding a briefcase like it was armor. He walked a few steps, then stopped when he saw the tractors lined up like an army that had chosen Daniel's farm by mistake. Werner didn't smile. He didn't even speak at first. He just stared, then turned slowly, scanning the rows as if counting would make it less impossible. Mr. Cooper, he said finally, and the professionalism in his voice cracked just enough to reveal confusion underneath. Where did these come from? Daniel held out the letter. Werner read it once, then again, his eyes lingering on the words about the job, the place to sleep, the chance. It says anonymous, Werner said. Yes, Daniel replied. Werner walked closer to the first tractor and rested his hand on the hood briefly, testing reality with touch. These are new, he said. Brand new. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder. then seemed to realize the folder had nothing to offer this situation. Each unit would be approximately $120,000, he said, calculating out loud without meaning to. This is. He stopped. Daniel didn't help him finish. Werner looked at Daniel again. If you can liquidate even a small portion of this, Werner said, you can resolve your outstanding balance and stop foreclosure immediately. Daniel's throat tightened. So you can stop it, Daniel said. Werner nodded, then raised a finger, the way he did when he needed to keep control of the conversation. With proof of funds, he said. Once you have funds transferred to an account, and we can verify, the foreclosure can be halted. Daniel felt anger flare. I have a field full of equipment worth more than my entire life, he said. And you still want me to prove I'm not lying? Werner met his eyes. Mr. Cooper, I believe what I'm seeing, he said. But I have policies, regulations, and legal obligations. I don't make the rules. Martha stepped forward, her voice calm but sharp. Then tell us what we need to do, she said. Werner recovered some of his composure. Sell a portion, he said. 10 units would more than cover your balance. Once the funds clear, I will personally file the paperwork to terminate foreclosure proceedings. Daniel swallowed. How fast? He asked. Werner glanced at his watch. You move quickly. You could have funds within days, he said. I suggest you contact a dealer or an auction service immediately. Daniel nodded. But he wasn't hearing the practical advice the way Werner expected. He was hearing something else, if this was real. The worst thing in his life could be over in a week. Werner closed his briefcase and walked back toward his car. Before getting in, he turned and looked at Daniel again. One more thing, Werner said. Be cautious. An anonymous transfer of assets of this size will attract attention. You may need legal counsel. Daniel didn't respond. He knew. Werner left, tires crunching gravel, and the farm fell quiet again, except for a distant truck on the county road, and the sound of Daniel's own breathing. That night, Daniel and Martha spread old photo albums and notebooks across the kitchen table. They weren't doing it for nostalgia. They were doing it like detectives. Daniel made lists on a legal pad, people who worked a season, people who'd needed a ride, people who'd been in trouble, people who'd asked for help and then disappeared. He circled names. He crossed them out. None of them felt right, not because they couldn't have been helped, but because the letter described something specific. A job, a place to sleep, a chance when everyone else turned away. That sounds like a kid, Martha said, her finger tapping the paper gently. That sounds like someone who didn't have a home. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I've hired people, he said. I've fed people. I've let a few sleep in the bunkhouse over the years. Martha's eyes didn't leave the letter. But not everybody would call it saving their life, she said. Daniel exhaled through his nose, annoyed at himself for not remembering. 42 years is a long time, he said. I can't even remember what I ate last week. Martha didn't argue. She just kept flipping through notebooks, pages of her handwriting from early marriage, small notes about bills, weather, work, people. On the 4th day after the delivery, a certified letter arrived from Chicago. Return address, Morrison, Chen and Associates. Daniel's stomach clenched as soon as he saw it, because law firms didn't write to people like him unless something was wrong. He opened it at the counter while Martha watched. The letter was formal, expensive paper, expensive language. It explained that the tractors had been purchased through a trust, that the benefactor wished to remain anonymous, and that Daniel had full rights to keep, sell, or transfer the equipment without obligation or restriction. At the bottom was a signature, Richard Morrison, a phone number. Daniel called immediately before his courage could fade. Morrison answered in a voice that sounded like he'd already anticipated the call. Mr. Cooper, he said. Daniel didn't bother pretending calm. I need to know who did this, he said. Morrison's response was practiced. I'm bound by attorney-client privilege, he said. My client has requested anonymity. Daniel clenched his jaw so hard his teeth hurt. Someone gave me $12 million, he said. Do you understand what that does to a person? I don't even know who to thank. I don't even know if I'm supposed to be afraid. Morrison was silent for a beat, then spoke more gently. Mr. Cooper, he said, My client's instructions were specific. They said you would not remember them. They said that was fine. Daniel's frustration sharpened. How can that be fine? He said. If someone remembers me well enough to find me 42 years later, how can I not remember them? Morrison didn't answer the emotion. He answered the structure. My client is not seeking recognition, he said. They wanted to give you something that would help you. That is all. Daniel's voice cracked, and he hated that it did. I don't want to be helped by a ghost, he said. I want to look them in the eye and say thank you. Morrison paused again, longer this time. If you had the opportunity, Morrison asked carefully, what would you want to say? Daniel blinked, surprised by the question. He looked at Martha, who was watching him like she was afraid he might break. I'd say I didn't do anything special, Daniel said. I'd say they didn't owe me a thing. I'd say I'm grateful beyond words, and I'm proud they made something of their life. Morrison's voice softened, but only slightly. I will pass that message along, he said. Daniel pressed. Is there anything you can tell me? He asked. Anything that helps me find them. Morrison's answer was a polite wall. Only that your actions mattered, he said. Daniel hung up feeling like he'd been handed kindness wrapped in silence. That night, Martha went back to the notebooks. Daniel sat with the legal pad, adding names, then staring at them like they were strangers. Around midnight, Martha stopped on a page and didn't turn it. Daniel noticed because she held her breath. Daniel, she said quietly. He looked up. Listen, she said, and her voice changed. The way it changed when she found something important in a stack of bills. She read from the page, August 3rd, 1982. Danny brought home a stray today. Kid named Marcus from Iowa, 18 and homeless. Danny gave him a job even though we can barely afford to pay ourselves. Daniel stared at her as if she'd spoken a name from a different life. Marcus. The name lit a dim corner in his head. A skinny kid. A backpack. Dirt on his face. Eyes too old for 18. Daniel swallowed. Marcus, he repeated. Martha looked at him. You remember, she said, not as a question, but as recognition. Daniel's hands started to shake again, the same way they had when the trucks first arrived. Marcus Webb, he said suddenly, and he didn't know how he knew the last name until he said it out loud. Martha nodded slowly. Yes, she whispered. Marcus Webb. The next morning, Daniel sat down at his laptop with a kind of fear he hadn't expected, because searching a name made it real in a different way. He typed Marcus Webb and hit enter. The results loaded, and Daniel felt his stomach drop. Marcus Webb, CEO of Webb Technologies. A headline about a valuation in the billions. A professional photo of a man in his 60s with silver hair and a confident, contained smile. Daniel leaned closer, studying the face the way you study an old photograph trying to find the boy underneath. That's him, Martha said from behind him before he even spoke. Daniel didn't answer. He clicked through, reading the biography like it belonged to a stranger and a ghost at the same time. Born in Iowa. Worked his way through school. Built a company specializing in agricultural technology and farm management systems. Known for philanthropy focused on at-risk youth and supporting small farmers. Daniel stared at that last line until it blurred. Supporting small farmers. He heard his own voice from the letter. You gave me a job, a place to sleep, a chance. He felt sick, not because of the money, but because he had forgotten. I forgot him, Daniel said, and the shame in his voice surprised him. Martha came around and put her hand on his shoulder. You didn't forget on purpose, she said. You didn't know you were the most important thing that ever happened to him. Daniel shook his head, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just trying to hold the weight. He called Morrison again. Mr. Morrison, he said when the lawyer picked up, I think I know who your client is. I think it's Marcus Webb. Morrison didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He paused just long enough to tell Daniel everything without saying the words. Mr. Cooper, Morrison said carefully, I can neither confirm nor deny. Daniel's throat tightened. Please, he said. I remember him now. He was a kid. He was hungry. I didn't do anything heroic. He stopped because he could hear himself trying to minimize it again. And he understood why Marcus had never let him. I need to thank him, Daniel said. I need him to hear it from me. Morrison's voice softened again, just a fraction. "I will pass your message along," he said. "But you should understand that my client does not want publicity, and they do not want you to feel obligated." Daniel swallowed. "Tell him I don't feel obligated," he said. "Tell him I feel stunned. I feel grateful. And I feel sorry I didn't remember sooner." Morrison didn't respond to that directly. "Your client said he'd understand when I remembered," Daniel added, and his voice broke on the word remember. Morrison paused. "Yes," he said quietly. "He did." 2 days later, a package arrived by courier with no return address. Only Daniel's name written clearly on the label. Daniel carried it inside like it might be fragile, not because it looked delicate, but because he didn't trust what it might do to him. Martha stood across the room watching. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside was a framed Polaroid photograph, old and slightly faded, but clear enough to hit him like a punch. There he was, younger, grease on his arms, standing beside an old tractor in the machine shed, his arm around the shoulders of a skinny kid with a stubborn smile. Daniel stared at the kid's face and saw it all at once: the desperation, the hunger, the relief of being allowed to belong somewhere even for a day. He flipped the frame over with shaking hands. On the back, in handwriting that matched the letter, were the words, "This was the day I stopped being nobody and started believing I could be somebody. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." Daniel sat down hard at the kitchen table and held the frame in both hands. He didn't cry right away. He just sat there, breathing shallowly, because the feeling wasn't simple joy. It was a complicated, human mix of gratitude and guilt and awe, and the strange realization that the smallest thing he'd done in a summer he barely remembered had grown into something massive, without him ever seeing it happen. Martha came to the table and placed her hand over his, firm, grounding. "He found you," she said softly. Daniel nodded once. "Yeah," he said, and his voice came out rough. "He found me, and for the first time since the trucks arrived." Daniel felt the mystery shift into something else not solved yet. Not finished, but aimed now, pointed toward a real person with a real history, and toward a moment that was coming whether Daniel felt ready or not. In the summer of 1982, Daniel Cooper was 21 years old and already tired in the way only people who work with their bodies every day understand. He had been married to Martha for months, was working full-time on his father Robert's farm outside Carterville, and was quietly doing the math in his head every night about how long it would take before he could afford land of his own. The answer was always the same: longer than he wanted to admit. That summer was hard in a way that didn't feel dramatic at the time, just relentless. The heat didn't let up. The corn struggled. Grain prices were low enough that every bushel felt like a loss. Robert Cooper ran 320 acres and employed exactly one person besides himself, because that was all he could afford, and even that was a stretch. Daniel worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7, because farms don't stop when calendars say they should. He didn't complain. Complaining didn't fix anything. One Thursday afternoon in mid-July, Daniel was in the machine shed working on an old tractor that refused to stay running. He had grease on his hands and sweat on his neck, and was thinking about how much a replacement part would cost when he heard someone call out from the driveway. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag and walked out, already prepared to say no, because people who showed up unannounced usually wanted something he didn't have. The kid standing there looked wrong in a way Daniel noticed immediately. Too thin, clothes worn down past the point of being work clothes, a backpack sitting on the ground like it was heavier than it looked. The kid stood straight anyway, shoulders tight, like he was holding himself together through effort. "Sir," the kid said, voice careful, "I'm looking for work, any kind. I can do whatever you need." Daniel didn't answer right away. He studied the kid's face, the eyes that didn't look like they expected kindness, but were still asking for it. "Where you from?" Daniel asked. "Iowa," the kid said. "Des Moines," Daniel nodded. "You eat today?" The kid hesitated just long enough to give himself away. "Yesterday morning," he said. Daniel felt the answer land in his chest harder than he expected. He thought about his father inside the house, about Martha making lunch, about the bills stacked on the counter, about how they barely had enough to cover themselves. He also thought about what it felt like to need help and not know where to ask for it. "Come up to the house," Daniel said finally. "My wife's got food." The kid's shoulders dropped just a fraction, relief leaking out before he could stop it. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you, sir." His name was Marcus Webb. He was 18 years old and had been kicked out of his stepfather's house 6 weeks earlier, with no money and nowhere to go. Over lunch, Marcus ate fast but not sloppy, like he was trying not to draw attention to how hungry he was. He told his story in pieces. He'd been walking and hitchhiking south, sleeping wherever he could, taking odd jobs when they appeared, losing them just as fast. "I can work," Marcus said, urgent. "I know farms. I can drive equipment. I'll do whatever. I don't need much." Daniel looked at Martha. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. They both knew they couldn't afford to hire anyone. They both knew what would happen if they sent the kid away. "I can pay $40 a week," Daniel said slowly. "It's not much. You can sleep in the bunkhouse behind the barn. We'll feed you." Marcus stared at him like he'd just been offered something unreal. "That's more than fair," he said quickly. "That's generous." Daniel shook his head. "It's honest," he said. "We start tomorrow. 6 a.m. Marcus nodded so hard Daniel worried his neck would hurt. "I won't let you down," Marcus said. The next morning, Marcus was up before Daniel. He worked hard in a way that wasn't loud or performative. He learned fast. He asked questions. He stayed quiet when he didn't know something and paid attention when Daniel explained. He treated every task like it mattered, because to him it did. Daniel noticed it without thinking much about it. To Daniel, work ethic was normal. To Marcus, it was survival. By August, it was clear the harvest wasn't going to be good. One evening, Robert Cooper called Daniel aside. "We can't afford to keep him," Robert said, not unkindly. "We're barely making it ourselves." Daniel knew that. He'd been doing the same math in his head. That night, he lay awake next to Martha and stared at the ceiling. "If we send him away," Daniel said quietly, "he's back on the road." Martha didn't answer right away. "Can we afford to keep him?" she asked. Daniel swallowed. "I can take less," he said. "I'll go down to 40. "Same as him." Martha turned toward him. "Daniel," she said. He met her eyes. "I can handle it," he said. "He can't." The next morning, Daniel told his father he'd take the pay cut. Robert looked at him for a long second, then nodded. "You're a better man than me," he said. Marcus stayed through October. He worked through the heat, through the bad days, through the uncertainty. When he finally left for a factory job in St. Louis, he shook Daniel's hand with both of his and didn't let go right away. "You saved my life," Marcus said, his voice tight. Daniel felt uncomfortable with the words. "You worked hard," he said. "You earned it." Marcus shook his head. "It wasn't the money," he said. "It was that you treated me like I mattered." Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he clapped Marcus on the shoulder and wished him luck. Then Marcus walked down the drive with his backpack, and Daniel went back to work. He didn't think about it much after that. It was just one summer, 42 years later, sitting at his kitchen table with the Polaroid in his hands. Daniel finally understood how wrong he'd been. He didn't look at the tractors much after that. Once the name had come back to him, once Marcus stopped being an idea and started being a person again, the machines felt secondary, like evidence instead of the story. Daniel spent the next day moving through the house slowly, doing small things on purpose, grounding himself in habits that hadn't changed just because his life had. He washed the same mug he always used. He folded the same work shirts. He kept thinking the phone would ring. It didn't. By mid-morning he sat down at the computer again, not because he wanted to, but because he felt like he owed the truth his full attention now. He read everything he could find about Marcus Webb. He didn't skim. He read it like he was studying for something that mattered. Born in Iowa, left home young. Community college, Northwestern, early software work. A company started in a small apartment. Growth that looked slow until it suddenly wasn't. By the time Daniel got to the articles about the IPO, his chest felt tight. He didn't feel pride the way people talk about pride. He felt something closer to disbelief, like the world had quietly carried on without asking him if he wanted to know what happened next. He paused when he reached the section on philanthropy. programs for at-risk youth, grants for students with no support, initiatives for small farmers facing foreclosure. Daniel stared at the screen and laughed once, short and sharp, because of course that was where Marcus had ended up, helping people who were about to lose everything. Daniel closed the laptop and sat back, his hands flat on his thighs. "I forgot him," he said out loud, testing the words. They didn't feel like a confession as much as an admission. Martha heard him from the other room and came in without asking. "You didn't forget because he didn't matter," she said. "You forgot because you didn't know he'd become part of your story forever." Daniel nodded, but it didn't fix the ache. He called Richard Morrison again, this time calmer, this time with purpose. "I know you can't confirm anything," Daniel said when Morrison answered, "but I need you to listen." Morrison didn't interrupt. "I remember him now," Daniel said. "He was a kid. He was hungry. I gave him a job for one summer. I didn't save him on purpose. I just didn't send him away." There was silence on the line. Then Morrison said, "What would you like me to pass along?" Daniel closed his eyes. "Tell him I'm sorry," he said. "Not sorry for helping him. Sorry that I didn't remember sooner. Tell him I never expected anything back. Tell him I'm proud of him." Morrison acknowledged that, professionally. But something in his voice shifted, just slightly, like he understood more than he was allowed to say. 2 days later, the package arrived. It wasn't large. It didn't look expensive. It sat on the counter like it belonged there. Daniel carried it to the table and didn't open it right away. He waited until Martha sat across from him, because some things weren't meant to be faced alone. Inside was the Polaroid. The image was simple. Daniel younger, Marcus thinner, an old tractor behind them, grease on their clothes, arms close enough to mean something. Daniel felt his throat close as the memory sharpened, not the big moments, but the small ones. Teaching Marcus how to check oil, letting him eat until he was full, saying his name like it mattered. He turned the frame over and read the words written on the back, slow and careful. "This was the day I stopped being nobody." Daniel pressed his lips together and nodded once, like that was the only movement he trusted himself with. He didn't cry right away. He sat there holding the photo, letting the weight of it settle, understanding finally that this wasn't a repayment. It was recognition, and that, somehow, felt heavier than money. Marcus arrived on a Saturday morning without calling ahead, driving himself in a plain Ford pickup that looked like it had spent more time hauling lumber than making statements. Daniel saw the truck slow at the end of the drive and felt something in his chest tighten. Before his mind caught up, he didn't need the license plate or the face yet. He just knew. The truck stopped near the porch, the engine cut, and Marcus sat there for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel, breathing like he was steadying himself. When he stepped out, the years were visible but familiar, silver hair where dark had been, lines earned instead of feared. The same posture Daniel remembered from a boy who stood straight even when he had nothing. They looked at each other without speaking, because words would have been a lie in that moment. Marcus crossed the distance first. Daniel followed. The hug wasn't graceful. It was two men grabbing onto something solid after a long fall, holding on longer than comfort allowed, both of them shaking in a way that surprised them. Marcus laughed once, breathless, and then cried, embarrassed and unashamed at the same time. "I didn't know how to do this," Marcus said finally, pulling back just enough to look at Daniel. "I didn't know how to show up without turning it into something ugly." Daniel wiped his face with his sleeve. "You showed up," he said. "That's enough." They sat on the porch where Daniel had opened the letter weeks earlier, the same boards creaking under weight they had never expected to hold. Marcus talked slowly, carefully, like he was choosing honesty over polish. He told Daniel about St. Louis, about factory floors and double shifts, about saving every dollar, because fear doesn't disappear just because circumstances change. He talked about community college and sitting in classrooms with kids who didn't know what it felt like to sleep in a car. He talked about discovering computers not as an escape, but as a tool, something that made sense to him when everything else felt random. He talked about Northwestern and working tech support nights, about starting web technologies in a studio apartment because he understood farms in a way spreadsheets never could. Daniel listened without interrupting, nodding when the pieces fit together. stopping Marcus only once. "You didn't have to carry me with you all that time," Daniel said. Marcus shook his head. "I didn't carry you," he said. "I carried the version of myself you made possible." Daniel looked away, because praise still made him uncomfortable. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He didn't slide it over right away. He held it, letting Daniel see it, letting the moment breathe. "The tractors were to save your farm," Marcus said. "This is to give you choice." Daniel didn't take it. "I can't," he said automatically, the reflex of a man who had spent his life making do without help. Marcus didn't push it forward. He met Daniel's eyes. "You gave me dignity when I had none," he said. "You didn't ask who I was going to become. You didn't ask for anything back. This isn't repayment. It's alignment." Daniel finally took the envelope and opened it, his hands steady now in a way they hadn't been for weeks. $2 million. The number didn't land as shock this time. It landed as responsibility. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Daniel asked quietly. Marcus answered without hesitation. "Whatever lets you sleep," he said. "Whatever lets you keep helping people the way you helped me, without destroying yourself in the process." In the months that followed, Daniel did what he had always done when faced with something bigger than him. He broke it down into work. He sold 60 of the tractors, kept 40, paid off the debt, fixed what needed fixing, and started answering calls from people he recognized too well. Farmers on the edge, families one bad season away from losing everything. He didn't give speeches. He didn't brand it. He set up a fund and used it the same way he'd used his time 42 years earlier, to give someone a chance. When he spoke at the Southern Illinois Farm Bureau meeting, he didn't dramatize it. He told the story plainly, about a boy he barely remembered, about forgetting and being remembered anyway, about how close he'd come to losing everything and how someone he helped once refused to let that happen. The applause embarrassed him. The letters afterward didn't. Marcus visited when he could, always quietly, always without cameras. Sometimes they talked about business. Sometimes they talked about nothing. Sometimes they sat on the porch and watched the field the way two men do when words aren't necessary. Daniel never stopped thinking about that summer in 1982, not with guilt anymore, but with clarity. He understood now that the moments he thought were small were only small to him, and that the life he almost lost had already saved another one long before anyone noticed.